Hi, I'm Elijah Meeks. I'm the the chief innovation officer at a small startup called Notable. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Data Visualization Society, and it's my pleasure to bring you the latest installment in this Viz Careers video series, this interview series from Data Visualization Society. Today, my guest is Rachel Binx. She's a freelance data visualization engineer. Hi, Rachel. How you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Today I have the background and the giant floating head, so that throws me off a little bit because it's not the I feel like the Wizard of Oz. So if there's anything you need me to grant you, if it's like a cheap stopwatch or a diploma, just let me
I
know. I
mean,
think I
you
can do
know,
it.
some nice ruby red pumps.
That's right. Ruby red pumps. Um, Speaking of the Wizard of Oz, you know, Rachel, you and I know each other through a couple of different channels. I feel bad because we already had Peter on here, so it feels like I'm just interviewing everybody who has worked at Netflix, and I worked at Netflix as some kind of scheme. But you did work at Netflix, right? And we connected there too. But how far back does your career go? When would you say you started getting into data visualization?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, in terms of professional work, it's been since about 2010. And then I got interested in it a couple of years prior when I was still in school, in college. And, this sort of is like an interesting beginning because, I felt like I was graduating into a recession
Yeah.
with 2 degrees that didn't really translate into jobs, and I was panicking about that. And so I was trying to find something I could do in a field that was hiring that, aligned with my skills. And at that time, data visualization was sort of taking off as this maybe not a new idea, but a very hot idea and something that was in demand. And so, and it aligned with my interest in both more kind of artistic design mediums and then also like mathematical, technical. So yeah, it was a really kind of happy accident almost that like I was just looking for some sort of career at the time that was, available as a career option.
I remember because I entered the job market during the same time. And it was funny because I thought I was a graduate student, so I could have stayed in graduate school if the job hadn't taken me. But I applied for this job at Stanford, and I just remember thinking, well, I'm not going to get this job, and especially not now because the entire economy's crashed. And I wonder, this is something that's probably outside the scope of this interview, but I feel like there's there D3 and the prominence of D3, the sort of maturity of it, has defined a certain segment. I don't think that's any kind of controversial statement, a certain segment of data visualization in the field. And it really did happen in this sort of Great Recession crash environment. And I wonder if there's something that affected the way that all of us sort of started to do data visualization. But to narrow it in a little bit, you said that you could see that data visualization was sort of hot. It was starting to become something that was powerful and interesting. How did you know that? What was it that gave you that signal?
Ooh, that's a very interesting question because I honestly, I don't have a good answer for it. Because it's one of these moments that I've had that was just this epiphany in my life. I
Yeah.
was in the middle of a lecture about something completely unrelated. It was about earthquake preparedness in Japan.
Okay.
And in the middle of that lecture, I was like, wait a minute, data visualization. I could do data visualization. And this is so rude in retrospect. You know, I'm
Yeah.
21, I'm sorry. But I stood up and I walked out and I was like, I must like immediately go like think about this and figure out like how am I going to do this and how am I going to learn
I
this.
have to understand the scene better. Did you stand up at the end, or you stood up in the middle of it, and you
Just in
thought,
the middle of the lecture, it was just like,
forget about earthquake preparedness. I need to go data visualization.
I know, seriously, it was super weird, and I didn't know how to code at that point. I mean, kind of. I had done like a C++ class as part of the math degree, but like
C++,
I hated.
common data visualization language.
Yeah, exactly. Well known. But no, I mean, thank God processing existed,
Yeah.
and Ben Fry wrote a book about doing data visualization with processing, and that became my Bible. And I spent a full year, like reading through that and then scouring for data sets online to try to come up with something that I could then visualize. And then, I basically had this like design portfolio of just like random data viz that I had made, and was gonna try to go shop it around to different design firms of like, hey, I just graduated, but like I'm so into data viz, like please hire me.
This has been a common story, not the walking out of the earthquake lecture. That's a new one, I have to say. I'll have to put that into the list of novel moments when people realized that they were a data viz person. But this common story of like, I'm passionate about this. And so there's a sense that, well, that's going to work. That's going to get me through all this other parts about not knowing technically how to do it, not knowing how to get this as a job, not knowing professionally what's required of me, but I'm passionate about this. And before we get into that, though, I want you to talk a little bit for the audience about processing. What is processing? What was Ben Fry doing? What did the Processing Foundation, what were they doing? What kind of work were people doing with processing, especially in contrast to something like D3?
Yeah. So processing is a language built on top of Java, and it was originally designed to be more of like a visual programming language, especially for artists and other creative people, and just really anyone who found it more intuitive to see something on the screen, which was a lifesaver for me, because trying to do math problems in C++, like it just never clicked as like, oh, what a powerful tool. And then when I could draw shapes and move them around on the screen and have them react, to where my mouse was, like that's where sort of programming started to come alive for me.
Yeah.
And processing, has developed since then. And now there's also the P5.js, which is a JavaScript implementation of kind of the same API and the same approach to designing a programming language. So I think, as a starting place, I mean, for me, it was invaluable. And I think people trying to get into programming now, I think it's still a really great route.
So I think that processing was one of those technologies that I sort of played with and never got into, because I think that especially early on in your career, you sort of have to invest in something. And I was investing in ProtoViz and then D3.
Well, but like there's also the timeline aspect of this, where processing came out a couple of years before D3. Right. And so when I was getting into programming, I took an OpenGL course in college because I was like, I'm so much a visual learner. Like, if I'm going to learn programming, I better do this, which would, like, on some level worked, and on some level it's totally stupid to sign up for like a, advanced programming course when I barely knew how to do anything. But I was like, I need shapes. I need something visual. And so, learn processing. But like, I started working at Stamen in the spring of 2011. And when I got there, it was still the like, oh, Flash is on its way out. We got to go figure something else out. There's Paper.js for a bit. That was another
right. I forgot about Paper.js.
I know, right? Still around. But yeah, and then I think, so we were kind of making it work for a bit and then when D3 dropped, like, oh my gosh, just this huge moment where, suddenly it's like, okay, cool. Now there's this way to be doing, graphics with SVG, which previously, was so hard to control, and we were doing everything in Canvas, which is still obviously a great technology, and certainly for like larger data sets, you want Canvas. But yeah, just like being able to like get into, when D3 happened, I mean, my gosh, we were all so excited.
So what would you say for an audience that's probably more familiar with D3 as an API? What would you say are the key differences between that and processing, besides what you already stated, which is D3 is SVG first and processing is very much Canvas?
Yeah, I mean, so admittedly, I have not really used P5.js, so I can't super speak to that. But the whole benefit of D3 was binding data to DOM elements. And that then the data persists, and instead of, it's either like you can run all of your calculations and all of your metrics and either have that in sort of running in JavaScript, or you can push it onto the DOM and then access it later with
Right.
like user interaction. So yeah, I think that was the benefit, you know, for me is that in terms of like a user, like, you know, hover and click and whatever other people want to do with the visualization, you can wait for that action to then know which element is being interacted with.
And it seems like, you know, what you were saying earlier, which we've heard from a lot of interview subjects, which is that it really helped them to understand key systems or mathematical principles to see it graphically. Which I don't think there's anything novel about that, but it is striking to see just how common that remark is. For myself, who not having a math background academically, it was tremendously valuable. But it's like D3 took it a step further, right? It was actually associating the data points with individual elements within the DOM. It was allowing you to associate hover events on the actual sort of quote graphical space, even if they were invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it was almost like that on steroids, right? It wasn't just visualizing it. It was that the DOM became the control surface and the metaphor for how you can store data, access it, interact with it, and transform it.
Yeah, and also being able to use like the web inspector for debugging is huge.
Yeah, especially once the web inspector got better and better, because that was also part of it, right? Was the standards themselves having to catch up. I think that Mike Bostock, the guy who invented D3, was always very clear about preferring standards over some kind of jQuery like polyfill, and instead saying, why don't we just use standards? And I think that was a tremendously positive influence on the D3 community, and I think the larger sort of web development community.
Yeah, and I mean also, you know, to contrast it pretty hard against Flash, which is this sort of like magic box that you drop into the DOM and then has a completely different ecosystem. So yeah, to move from that to this like
I hated it. I hated because I was using Flash. I loved ActionScript 3, and the performance was so much better. And I remember when Steve Jobs said Flash was evil, and then everybody at Stanford said, "Oh well, Steve Jobs said it. Flash must be evil. We have to stop using Flash now. You have to use some kind of web library." And at the time, I had to use ProtoViz, and I thought the performance is terrible. It's, you know, the different browser. Oh, this is terrible. Why don't you just give me my black box that runs Flash inside it just fine and fast everywhere? So that was definitely a historical moment. I want to focus on this timeline that you drew. So we ask every interview participant to show a timeline of their career. And we've seen a lot of different varieties of how these timelines. One of them was a family circle kind of, or family circus style cartoon. And so stuff that's very much on the art side and stuff that's very analytical like this. You're working at this point around 2011, according to the timeline, if I can read a timeline properly. You're working at this point at Stamen, which is a very well-known studio in San Francisco. And you've sort of described this period as exploratory data visualization. So wouldn't like, I would think that Stamen would be much more about, since you're making sort of comms work and stuff like that, was much more explanatory. Why would you label this as exploratory?
I mean, that's definitely how we were thinking about it at the time. And I think that, you know, at that moment when sort of data visualization was this buzzy, you know, new field, just for you. But anyway, so, you know, I think at that time it was kind of really easy to get work with these large companies that just had data and they wanted it visualized, and they just wanted something that looked really cool, that got people excited about it, you know, as this marketing tool. And, you know, I definitely, most of my projects were not to tell a specific story or arrive at a specific conclusion, but to, you know, present this sort of environment that people could come in and, you know, click around and explore stuff and find interesting things. And, you know, there was some like, oh, let's know the data well enough to shape the visualization that it should reveal something interesting. But like, but yeah, this is something that we talked about a lot at the studio when I worked there about, you know, like, should we have a point of view, or should we allow the user to come in and, you know, form their own opinion from the data? And I think also, you know, like the conversation in the visualization world has shifted a bit too, right? Where, it's much more common now that people are saying, oh, data isn't neutral and visualization isn't neutral, and, every choice has a point of view, which is true. And so I think the field has shifted a bit away from these exploratory ones. And then, I mean, frankly, I think if you're a big company paying for this thing, at some point you're like, wait a minute, I could be pushing an agenda. And so yeah, let's make the visualization, say this or make people feel this about the brand. So, kind of the marketplace also shifted.
It's this, I was talking to Peter Bashai, and he was at Boku. Boku doesn't even do data visualization anymore. It feels like there was very much this era of studios, and Stamen's still doing data viz, though they're just about to close their office. I think they just did last week. They closed their office in San Francisco finally. They not that they've closed down, but they've shut down the office because what are you doing coming into the office anymore? Look at me, I'm a giant floating head. What do I need an office for? But let's rewind for a second, because this is the audience for this is people who are trying to orient their careers, and probably a lot of the folks are watching this, or how do I get into this? How do I become successful at this? So let's step back to the beginning of this rectangle. How did you get this job? Like, how did it work? You rushed out of an earthquake. Let me set the stage for folks. You rushed out of an earthquake preparedness lecture, which means that never trust Rachel if she's in the Bay Area. You rushed home to build your portfolio, and then where was the step 3 ? Before you got to the fancy job and the career track?
Yeah, when we draw the rest of the owl. I mean, I gotta tell you, it's messy and it's a lot of luck, and it's one of the
That's okay. You can tell us about the mess and the luck. It's okay. Nobody's gonna watch this, so you're just telling me.
No, but I mean, I had my little portfolio, and I sent it to Stamen, and I didn't hear anything back. And then I happened to be in New York, and a friend of mine was trying to get me an interview at the newspaper that he worked at. And then there happened to be one of the people from Stamen was giving a talk. And so I went to the talk, and at the end I walked up and I was like, hi, I've applied to work at your studio. And this poor person, who was Mike Migursky, was sort of, taken aback of like, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll get back to you at some point. I was like, okay, cool. And I mean, this is literally the most lucky story. So then I'm back in San Francisco, where I'm living, which is where Stamen is. And then I'm walking down 16th Street near the Stamen office, and I literally run into Mike on the street, and I'm like, hey, it's you. It's, we just met in New York a couple weeks ago. How's it going, man? And he's like, oh, hey. Okay, I'll go look at your job thing. So,
he didn't make a map first. I mean, it's Mike Migursky. Didn't he say, like, you have to go make a quad tree? like go and unwind a polygon first, and then I might like bump you. For those who don't know, like, what's Mike Migursky's specialty? Like, who's Mike Migursky?
Mike Migursky is one of the original 3 partners of Stamen. He is an incredible engineer. He was sort of, kind of the back end, the DevOps guy at Stamen. He has gone on to do a lot of amazing mapping work with OpenStreetMap. He's currently now at Felt. We also work together again at MapZen. So we are map friends for life. But yeah, so anyway, I mean, literally luck of running into people in person.
That's a very messy and unreproducible.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of advice you give to an early career person. Like, run into the person several times.
Okay, so my actual advice here is, so I was the first person that ever got hired from cold calling the studio. And so the actual message here is like persistence of, continue, because I also, emailed in the middle being like, hi, I haven't heard from you in a couple weeks. Like, how's it going? Still here, still waiting for this job. And, yeah, so I just kept hammering on it. And also, I had, my little, my second and third choice, and I was, kind of ready to go for that. And then my backup option is 2011 was the first year that IO Festival
Oh, right.
happening in
Wow.
Minneapolis. And
This is
so,
all.
yeah, so that was my, like, if I don't have a job by June, by the time IO happens, I'm going to go to IO and I'm going to talk to every single person who will look me in the eye, and I will try to get a job. And then if that doesn't work, then, like, I'm giving up, and I'm no more database, and I'll go, I don't know, be a waitress for a while. Like, so yeah, like I find, like, I started at Stamen, I think in April of 2011. So, slid under the wire kind of.
What was the appeal of Stamen? Like, what in your mind was a reason to work there?
Well, at that time, I knew of like 3 data visualization firms, and I went to school in the South Bay, and I wanted to live in San Francisco, and one of them's in San Francisco. So, it was like geographic proximity. But yeah.
So what happened? So you got your dream job. Persistence paid off.
And luck.
It's a beautiful story. And then, you only stayed there for a couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, those, at least at that time, those sorts of design firms ran hot and fast. And like, it's almost agency work. It's that client grind of, like, I just got to be on it. I mean, I was really bad about, like, work-life balance. Right. I basically, like, stopped hanging out with people at night. I would just stay late. I would work on nights, on the weekend. It was so nice to go work because it was so quiet in the studio. Like, I worked all the time. And what happens when you do that? You get burnt out. So, so yeah, I mean, after a little bit, I also, in the beginning of 2012, launched Meshu with Shah Wang, which was a jewelry company, but also based on, like, geodata and maps. And that, was very well received. It was very exciting. And so part of me wanted to go and focus on that. So yeah, but, like, also, I mean, to be clear, this visualization that we're looking at is, like, a very accurate, like, down to the month of where I was working. And so that giant white space is me, recovering from burnout and somewhat working on this company, but also just, I spent a while being like, I can't do this. I'm not cut out to be a programmer. Like, it's too intense. I made this mistake. I got to go back. I got to go figure out something else to do with my life.
I think that's an imposter syndrome that we don't often hear. We often hear about this sort of active imposter syndrome. You're in an office, somebody has asked you to do some code, or they've commented on your code, and you're like, oh my God, how did I even sneak into this place? I feel like a fool.
Yeah.
This is a different kind of imposter syndrome, right? Like, this is this feeling that I don't have that macho 24/7 attitude to survive in tech.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that, and how I'm hoping, I don't know, maybe you didn't figure it out, maybe you're still, but, like, how did you work through that? What kind of advice would you give to folks who maybe are idealizing that, maybe are don't even realize that they're in the middle of it? Like, how do you help them to orient themselves?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have this clear memory of, like, leaving Stamen, and multiple people said to me, he said, oh, it's so exciting that you're leaving Stamen, and now you're going to have all this time for your projects. And I'm sure you have so many projects that you want to do. And I was like,
right.
Projects? I want to stare at the wall. Like,
what's next for Team Rachel? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean,
there is that pressure, though, right? I mean, I was just talking to Britt Kava, and for folks who are watching this, there is a direct correlation between your experience and Britt's experience. Her experience was more dramatic. She eventually at Facebook just said, like, she was suffering physical issues from the stress, and just finally said, look, I can't, and I gotta step back.
Yeah.
And but everybody, I've heard this too, right? Like, as soon as you're done with something, especially if you have any kind of social media presence, they say, well, that's great. What's your next jewelry line, Rachel? What's the next map thing you're going to do, Rachel? And what do we, what kind of part of that early career is building up to that point where people actually know who you are and want you to perform, but then
Yeah.
here's that cruel sort of like your strength is weakness moment, right? Like how do you deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, crying.
Pro
No,
tip: cry more.
it's a good release.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I did struggle with that. You know, I'll be very honest about it. And like, you know, I also had a benefit of, you know, I was in a relationship with someone who was also my business partner, and that person had the same career as me. And so, you know, we had a very similar skill set, and I, you know, for a bit was working on freelance projects with him. And then we were also working on like our companies together. And so, you know, that's another, like, I don't know, it was a double edged sword, right? Because I feel like, you know, on many levels, like it was incredible. And, you know, my career probably wouldn't be at the point where it is if I didn't have these opportunities afforded by that other person. On the other hand, it becomes your whole life. You know,
When your social network is all tech people, then it's sort of, you don't have anybody to go to just go, you know, yeah.
yeah. And
How
this,
else do you value yourself? How many new projects have you put out? Like that's the only way,
yeah,
especially in these parts of tech, like data visualization, especially during that period, was very sort of explosive and exciting. And
mhm.
when you're in that, then people kind of they become your fans, right? I'm sure that you ran into people who very well intentioned, but they're saying, "Hey, entertain me some more with some new tweets with your new work," right?
Yeah. You should be posting more. um, yeah, I mean it's true, and like, you know, honestly, at that point in my life, I did put a lot of effort into my online presence and building the brand and
Yep.
tweeting about, you know, work, and here's screenshots in process, and here's, you know, it was like shit posting about data viz all
Right.
day every day.
I've seen what, a half dozen Black Friday tweets from you, right?
Well, I mean, that's business, baby.
No, it is. It is. And that's not meant to call you out. I mean, it's
Yeah,
that, you know, this is something that I've talked a little bit about. I think that, you know, once you become part of our field is public facing, especially when you're doing freelance, but when you're not, like part of my professional success is because I'm successful on Twitter.
yeah,
And I recognize that. And when you say it's business and you kind of cringe because you're talking about Black Friday because you're trying to sell something, it's business, and you kind of cringe because you're posting some screenshot of the library you're working on, and you want people to know, hey, I'm still here, still doing cool stuff. Look at these arrows on this Sankey diagram, right? Like
yep, yep.
there is this pressure, this constant pressure that comes from that sort of. I wonder why. Let me turn this into a question. I wonder why. Uh, is it because we're doing visual work? Is it because we're portfolio based? Is there a reason why social media figures so prominently into our field? Or is it just confirmation bias because I happen to be terminally on social media and you happen to be terminally on social media, and so are all of the people that I'm evaluating because that's the only way I can evaluate them?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I think a lot of it now is confirmation bias, but certainly, you know, in I think like the early 2010s, you know, that was when Twitter was huge.
Mhm.
And I mean, you know, you and I know each other from Twitter
Yeah,
initially,
yeah,
which is how, you know, our whole network at that time was on
yeah.
Twitter. And like I've tried to explain this to people that, you know, especially who aren't in tech at all, where I'm like, oh yeah, like a lot of my career I have because of Twitter.
Yeah.
And because everyone who's important in my field is also on Twitter, and
Yeah.
we just like chatted each other all day long.
I think you made a really good point because you're saying it's confirmation bias now, but the implication there is that is how people got successful back then. And those are now the successful people that are kind of the tastemakers, that are kind of the thought leaders, that are kind of in charge, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you know, I think even this still happens, like, because I'm sure you've been here too, but, when you're hiring new candidates and you're like, okay, let's go look them up online. Like, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, okay, whatever. This is my bias. Let me own my bias. Is I will see, oh, do they have a Twitter account? Oh, cool. What do they post? And if someone, like, if all they post is like, oh, here's the newest thing about React hooks.
Yeah.
And then, conversely, if it's like, well, at this point, it's like, if you're only talking about, like, you're baking and like walk along the ocean, like, God bless, like, keep doing that. But I think like you kind of like, if someone is tweeting about their work, posting it online, that gives like a much richer view of who they are and the personality that they're going to bring, to the team. So it's.
And I think that, why do you think it is? Because the personality aspect of it, I know exactly what like, I have the same feeling. And it does seem like that when it comes to evaluating data visualization, especially for people who are trying to move into a role where they're collaborating. Personality is important, but it seems like it's particularly something that like almost your social personality versus like the collaboration. I could imagine, and maybe I'm being overly idealistic, I could imagine somebody who's evaluating a generic engineer based on their commits on GitHub. And it's kind of, in a way, it's a lot cleaner. You're like, oh, this is how you collaborate. Whereas with data viz, I do feel like part of it is, oh, well, how do you collaborate? Let's see if you play nice on Twitter, or if you're just kind of a shit poster on Twitter, or whatever. Shit posting means different things. So not your kind of shit poster, but relentlessly critical. You're relentlessly pedantic about things. You see this all the time on Twitter of like, oh, I can't believe you used a pie chart. And you're like, thanks, buddy. I'm glad that somebody told me they didn't like pie charts in the year 2022.
Yeah.
But I wonder, why do you think that is, that we think about that social layer?
Yeah, so I would argue that data visualization is a very interesting field where, it's half design, it's half development. So you have to be technically minded. You at least have to know like the constraints of the technology that would be used to render whatever visualization it is. So, it's a communication job with a hugely technical aspect, which is a rare thing in people. And to just go like complete stereotypes for a bit, the full engineer that only writes code, doesn't have to talk to anyone, leave me alone, I'm going to be off in my corner, versus, the so sociable designer who's always, hanging out with people and posting lavish TikToks. I don't know.
Building connections with stakeholders, Rachel.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for bringing this back to professional context. No, but I think, I think the database people have to have both of those. And so on some level, you were trying to test for like, okay, does this person have, the social awareness to be interacting with people in like a pleasant and collaborative way on Twitter?
When I was working at Netflix, there was an engineer, and I don't have to protect their identity because I can't remember their name, but this engineer who just wanted to sort of like clear all the objections to anything and say, look, I've built this library that shows 1 million data points on scatter plots. We should just use this. And, to me, to your point, that's an answer that is completely missed the question. And the question is, what do these human beings want? What are we trying to communicate? Where's the actual insight and impact? And you're giving me this very comfortable, and I'm sure like technically accurate answer, which is, here's this great piece of code. But, I know from my own work, but I have seen it in other people's work too. Some of the best data visualization work out there is a mess underneath. It's very bespoke. You look at like, I guess I can't call anybody out on this because someone would take it as an insult, and I don't even mean it that way. But there are some projects that I can think of off the top of my head where people told me, very popular project, and they said, oh yeah, God, it's a mess. Like, look at this, and we'd go look through the code and we'd laugh about like, you're just writing everything as a single file, and you're not even like, TypeScript, you're not using anything. You're just kind of, and it works. And I don't think that we need to, like, I don't actually think that's something to denigrate. I think bespoke stuff has become less prominent in the field. But there's almost been a pressure from the other end where I feel like data viz engineers are expected to grow up and not just write everything like these sort of inline fluent style. We know Mike Bostock taught you to write like with all this method changing, but stop doing it and use TypeScript and use React and get it together and be a real engineer. Like, have you felt that pressure? Have you seen that pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, yeah, I've seen this playing out in different ways. I think most common for like, freelance projects or even, at Netflix and working with other teams where there is almost this like fear of D3, that it's so hard and it's so unmaintainable and, we should use a library.
Yeah.
And, libraries are great. And for, getting something done quickly, it looks clean and you don't have to go in and,
let me pause you there for the world at home. Like, D3 is a library, but what you're talking about is a higher level library, like a High Charts or Plotly or something like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, but and so I don't know. In the times where I've been like, okay, fine, we can go use these, charting libraries. But then I'm sure you've been here. You quickly run into like, oh, actually, this looks bad, and now we want it to act differently, look differently. And unless I'm going to go in and get into the, the build scripts of the library, like, too bad,
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, I would also argue that this is mirrored in like web trends in general. That perhaps the sort of framework wars, and now that everything's like in React, like there's almost like a pre-optimization that happens on a lot of web projects of like,
I think you're right.
Let's do something simple and clean, and let's use this component library so everyone knows exactly what it is. And the sort of the weird like more bespoke sites, those come in a way. There's a little bit of like a neo data surgeons of it, but like it's sort of across the web in general. This like it's time to get very serious and only use.
No, I think you're right, and I think that it is. I mean, all of the sort of JavaScript fatigue and all of that stuff all happened around the same period because frameworks predated D3's popularity. And so did a lot of these jQuery and a lot of these technologies and MVC and all of that stuff. But D3's popularity really was during this period when we were also simultaneously getting these signals about JavaScript fatigue and not over-investing in one little part of the ecosystem. There's a couple of really interesting, like, long-tail anthropological studies now that's come out of this conversation that I'd love to do on the data viz community when it comes to our particular part of it, where I'm more knowledgeable. Like, I can't speak to Tableau as well, but for definitely that D3 part of the community, I've heard from multiple people now almost exactly the same experience, almost exactly the same perception of how things were, the culture and how things, the opportunities early on, the kinds of opportunities. It's really amplified over and over again by anyone you speak to who has that sort of experience that goes back to that sort of 2010 period. I want to shift gears though, because we got really sort of deep into the technical, and that's going to be helpful for some of our audience who's a technical audience. But I also want to speak to, because you're not just an engineer. You're not just an engineer, Rachel. You're also somebody who runs out of earthquake lectures. You're also a designer, and you're a very well-respected designer. Like, people think of you as a good designer, which is a hard place to get to. So let's talk about, you mentioned this earlier. Let's talk about some of this work you've done, especially the work that you've done where you feel like it's more about design, even though I know from this project there's a lot of technical aspects of it too. But you mentioned, is it Meshu?
Yes, it's Meshu.
Talk to me about this, yeah.
Yeah. So this is a project that I did in 2012 with Xia Huang. And well, to speak of the excitement of D3, I mean, part of why this exists is that the Delaunay triangulation was a default layout in D3, and I got very excited. I was like into triangles and this aesthetic. It sounds so stupid, but anyway, so
all polygons are made up of triangles. You can't. It's not stupid, Rachel. Lovely triangles.
Yeah, triangles rock. I mean, you'll notice that this, the map tile by Stamen design, I've got the proper attribution on this. This is when Stamen, released their toner map, which was this
beautiful map.
Black and white. Yeah, another like watershed moment, I think, for like web maps. So anyway, so Meshu was a way to be plotting locations on a map and then having this design be generated from those. And we initially mocked it up to be using Foursquare data.
Mm-hmm.
So these are my check-ins from Las Vegas.
No, I didn't know that.
There we go. But yeah, and so these, I think we have a second Meshu slide, but I was working on this project for, I think, about 5 years total, and I was kind of adding these different algorithms for taking locations and turning it into different shapes. Mm-hmm. And as you can see here, there's, this, as you would scroll down the page, you would get this mock-up of how it would look like as, necklaces or earrings, and then the different materials, either laser cut or 3D printing. And this project was also when sort of 3D printing was really taking off, and Shapeways had just, announced that you could send a design file and get a physical object back. And so it was this really nice.
I don't think we've explained. Meshu this is jewelry.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Right? This is jewelry that's based on a data set that you send in, and so basically personalized by your quantitative self, right? Your quantified self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I mean, this project was quite successful, and a lot of people got really excited about a way to be sort of remembering and celebrating places in their life. And yeah, for like, I mean, the reason that you see so many Black Friday tweets from me is because they're Christmas gifts.
And let me ask you. I mean, the quantified self was a very interesting. Like the quantified self sort of came and went as a movement, and but the fact that you are a collection of data points within a massive systems never went away. Like just the sort of focus on it went away.
Yeah.
But why do you think this resonated with people? Why do you think that these, because these are geometric shapes. They're like completely abstract geometric shapes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think it resonated because people were creating the designs themselves. And so, this website, it's interesting with the quantified self, because my issue with that, maybe not my issue, but why I never got into that movement is that it's too much data, actually. Like most of your day, most of your life by total percentage is not super interesting, and memory as a process, you are selectively pruning the things that are actually important to you.
Yep.
And so just having like, here's, every single place that I was for the last month, okay, cool. I was at home and I went to work, like, occasionally went out to dinner. And I think something that was nice about Meshu, the Foursquare thing was sort of almost a gimmick to get the data initially, but it was actually way more popular for people to be typing in these places. And like, like this screenshot is, the 5 places that are really important in my life, so this is like deeply personal jewelry and deeply personal designs. And we tried to make the UI kind of like as fun as, the whole thing like animates in with new points so that it's sort of this fun experience to be seeing these design take shape.
I think that that ability to let people describe themselves in data, it gets away from, I think, the quantified self. Here, let me the quantified self was about the data that was collected by you or on you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, data visualization or data as a form of expression, also allows, in the way that you're talking about here, curated or even aspirational data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you could make something like a piece of jewelry here, and it could be all the places I wanted to go in Las Vegas. I mean,
Mhm.
to me, that sort of full form of expression is very powerful, because I don't think we see it in data visualization. I think with data visualization, it's almost entirely retrospective. It's not very introspective. It's
Mhm.
it's not very inflected. Like all of the things that we think about with other communication forms, with data visualization, it's almost all like backward looking and focused on some kind of immediate decision point, like almost like I don't have a good. I've got a couple of analogies and none of them are good. But like it's interesting to me because something like this is very sort of. First of all, it's physical.
Mhm. Mhm.
It tries to embrace beauty. It tries to, like I said, allows you to sort of declare data points. You don't have to have actually lived them, have done them in some kind of.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's very exciting. Like I wonder if that was part of, like, I wonder under the hood, nobody's thinking about this, right? But implicitly I wonder if that's where some of the appeal of this came from.
Yeah, I mean, it's also we also shipped all of these with a postcard of the design, and then also allowed people to write something on the back that would get printed on the postcard. So the vast majority of these were gifts. They were commemorative. Like, here's where we took a vacation, or here's like where we both lived when we met, and here's where we live now. So yeah, I don't know. It's a really sweet project.
No, absolutely. So we've got a question from Bridget in the chat, and she wants to know, and this sort of ties into aesthetics and design. She says, her professor studied Edward Tufte. Have you looked at his work or used his principles in your work? What's your relationship with Tufte?
Yeah. So back in my little when I was racing to figure out how to do data viz, I definitely got the Tufte books, and I
Yep.
read through them, and was also doing book reports on them. I think they are a great starting point for design principles, and when you're coming into data visualization as a field,
Yep.
to think about, okay, how do I strip down to what is kind of the most basic, the most useful, and what are some design principles around how to make this legible and
Yep.
interpretable for people. That said, I think once you have like a good grasp of that, then I don't think they are hard and fast rules, and I think that a lot of the fun is kind of breaking them or kind of bending the rules in an intentional way. If you know what you're doing, and if the payoff is going to be worthwhile, then like, yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good fundamental. It's almost like learning like the grammar of a language, and then at some point you get into slang and idioms of like, okay, this isn't quite by the rules, but like this is how people actually communicate. This
That's
is
right.
like the day-to-day how people. Yeah.
It's interesting because that brings you back to this sort of communication metaphor, that you're thinking of data visualization as a form of communication. And we have to understand that in communication, it's not all just about literacy and vocabulary, right? It's about, like you said, idiom. It's about situational understanding of who your audience is, cultural issues, and also language. If I make the greatest poster or whatever, if I make the greatest pamphlet entirely written, but it's in German and my audience is Japanese, then I've done a bad job. Even if it's wonderful German, even if I've written perfect German, even if German was the most like appropriate language for expressing these concepts, it doesn't matter, right? And I think that sort of linguistic frame to data visualization is really valuable. And I think that because, I've gone back to a lot of these, like you're saying, structural aspects of language, like not just saying, oh, it's like communication, so therefore we gotta, and then get soft. No, it's like communication, so here are some concrete principles we know about communication, and how does that map to data visualization. But I want to get to another one. So MC Alpine 720 says, I wonder whether Elijah or Rachel have thoughts about work-life balance when displaying your communication online is potentially helpful to your future prospects. So how do we get work-life balance if what we've taught all of these people is work your ass off and your social life should just be data visualization, and then you'll be successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that's a big open question. Um, no, I mean, I have definitely gone through different phases over the years on my online presence, and like I will certainly. I think also, well, I don't know. Like, frankly, my online presence mimics my real life and what I'm actually working on. So if there's some project that I'm super stoked on, then I'm going to be posting about that all the time, and like.
Let's pull up one of those because you're working on Amtrak maps right now, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
we'll get into the details of it before I want to answer MC Alpine's question first, but I want to pop this up because yeah, you're still doing it. It's not like you stopped, right? You didn't stop posting your work or sort of building an online presence and portfolio.
So I was just at a residency that I was working on this project, and so yeah, all day, all week was posting about like, yeah, just add this new thing, and oh, if you click into one of the routes, then you'll see, this route visualization, and cool, I just marked up like, all the transfer points. You can click on that. I was like, yeah, click. And so I have all these, tweets about this now. Here, click the silver service Palmetto line, and then backseat driving. Okay, so like cool, and then scroll down. I just, this took me like a day and a half to get the SVG.
Oh, I love it. I haven't seen the one on the side where it's actually doing
it's so nice.
That's beautiful. You've actually got you've got like a subway map layout over here.
Right?
But now hold on, because what we're doing here is we've gotten caught up in the celebration of your work. How do we acknowledge that you need to celebrate your work and it's important for your professional career, but also go back to 2012 burned out Rachel and tell people how they avoid that?
Yeah. So anyway, I bring this up to say that this is probably the first time that I've been very excitedly tweeting about a project in about a year.
Okay.
Because also, in leaving Netflix, I mean, I don't know. I wasn't as burned out after Stamen, but I was a little burned out and was taking time off, and was posting hike photos, and I think
they were nice photos, Rachel. You don't have to feel bad.
No, it's not that. It's just like, like sometimes I'm like, oh, I really got to go post more data viz. And I'm like, well, I'm not thinking about data viz, so I won't, here's some nice rocks.
I mean, I think that, we've sort of circled around it, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is that, again, it's sort of the unhelpful. It's the advice that people don't want. Like early career people want a list of things they can do to be successful. And pretty much everybody, when they talk to you about this, who's really successful in the field, like you are, and let's acknowledge it, you are very successful in your field. There isn't sort of a map to get there. No matter how good your maps are, there is no amazing map of how to be successful at data visualization.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had several points in my career where I wondered, like, is that it? I'm struggling. I can't find, the cool project.
What are some things that you felt like you struggled with?
Well, okay. So in that initial, the career timeline, I've got the design studio and then the freelance, and then it's like a hard pivot into full-time employment. That was a big thing. So I was thinking, oh yeah, maybe I'm going to be this cool freelancer forever, and And then I was hitting this limit of the types of jobs that I could get as a single person freelancer. Where, at that point it was sort of like, okay, you can have this box on the website and you can put the visualization in the box. And, it was fine for a couple of years, obviously, but I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to be working on sort of longer term web applications. And so I, pivoted into this, internal tools. And
hold on a second. You're kind of burying the lead here. Like, you worked in the government. Did you work at the DMV, Rachel?
I worked at NASA. I worked at JPL. I was doing spacecraft telemetry. I mean, it was cool, but it was also, it's a very different thing from being this freelancer where you have all this time and you can just trot around and be like, yeah, I don't like working, to like, no, this is a government job. I'm there every day and I'm working, on the same software project,
Yeah.
every day forever.
And so for you, it wasn't so much necessarily the subject matter. It was the longevity, the sort of consistency of the project. You were coming back to something that you could have that had a maturation process, that had sort of recognizable chapters to its development rather than a single shot kind of thing.
Well, and that was the first time in my career that I really worked on, one project. I was there for 13 months
Oh
and it
yeah, I
was
guess so.
a
I didn't even think
project.
that
Yeah.
long.
So, like even stuff at Stamen, I think, the longest project was maybe like 2 months. So, just a completely different way of working.
I mean, people, I talk to folks about the work I was doing at Netflix, and they're like, "Oh, so you built dashboards?" I'm like, "Yeah, kinda. I mean, I built dashboards that took us 6 months to design and build. I mean, these are, and then you maintain for years and update and upgrade, and it's a different thing than like kicking out a single sort of report. And I'm not saying it's a better thing, because honestly, I did some of that comms work back at Stanford, and there's something value there's of course, this sounds mealy mouthed, it sounds weaselly, but there's value in both of these, right? And I think that in some of these careers, it seems like, I don't know that I would go so far as to say to be successful, but I think to be someone who is prominent like you are, I think you do have to touch multiple parts of the data visualization domain. That you can't just be a great viz person who does one like area or one approach. You have to be able to speak to and understand the trade-offs and why these people over here aren't worse than you. They're just doing different things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And like I'm so grateful that I started my career early on, at a design firm doing a lot of quick projects where like, I just got a lot of experience building,
Yeah.
different types of designs and different design aesthetics and different audience considerations as well.
Let me ask you, so we have another question from Jaron Heard. Speaking of residencies, if there's time, Rachel, could you speak about how you got into doing that, or your experience, quote, at the intersection of art and technology? So I don't know if you ever had an official residency, but you sort of created like the Rachel Institute of Rachelomics, right? Like you did your own.
Well,
you
okay,
would
so
go out and do your own stuff that was at the intersection of art and technology, regardless of whether or not some Guggenheim gave you a fellowship, right?
yeah, that is true. That is true. I have to spend a lot of time sort of between working and doing my own things, which is valuable, and I've made life trade-offs in terms of like economic security and but it's like it's generally worked out. But no, I did actually just do my first official residency like 2 weeks ago. It was a map themed cohort at the Gradient Retreat up in British Columbia.
That's right. You did mention that. That must be where Jaron got that, because you were mentioning that when you were building that Amtrak map. That's right.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, to that point, like I don't know, it's a goal of mine to do more of these projects, and I think that something that I've had a tension around is like, am I an engineer? Am I a designer? Am I an artist? Should I go do art things? Can I talk about having an art practice? And then if I pitch myself as that, can I still get an engineering job? So that kind of tension. I think, in like 2019, 2020, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna go do residency things more. And then of course, this happened, and so they didn't happen. But that is something that I'd like to explore more. And certainly having done this for a week, was like, holy crap, I got so much done when, you're explicitly in a setting, especially with other people who are also excited about, the same topic as you, and you're just like powering through this for 14 hours a day.
Well, I think that, I think I speak for everyone in saying we've all enjoyed watching this tension between, are you an engineer? Are you an artist? Are you a designer? And that's one of the reasons why I knew that this would make for a great interview, and it has. Like it's an incredibly interesting story that touches on these key sort of themes that we're all struggling with, regardless of what point you're at in your career. And a lot of it has to do not just with doing data visualization, right, but just working, just living. So this has been wonderful. Was there anything you wanted to point people at, Rachel? Was there any of your work, like maybe the Amtrak Explorer, or
Yeah,
there it is. There it is on screen already. Look at that.
public transit for all. Yeah, and then all the rest of my projects are just up at rachelbinx.com if you want to check them out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Rachel. This has been spectacular.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course.